If you're new here, welcome. My name is Jaden. I'm an author and a poet living in Melbourne. I like to do things a little differently. One of those things is street poetry. Leaving my poetry around the streets of this city for people to find. What began as a passion project during our long lockdowns turned into something so much larger. People were reading my words. I was no longer dreaming of being read by others. I had made it happen. So I continued the project, and more people would reach out to me, telling me how my poetry had made them feel. I called my project the Melbourne Street Poetry Project. I hope my street poetry can continue to inspire hope, love and peace among everyday people passing by. This year I'm hoping to expand the project beyond Melbourne. Australia is so large, and I haven't even seen most of it yet. I decided to begin with the Great Ocean Road, a 2 to 3 hour coastal trip away from the CBD. It became a road trip with my friends in late January. My partner Maddie did the driving, because I can't drive. I'd photocopied almost 1,000 of my poems for the trip ahead. I didn't know what I was doing or why I was aiming so high. I think I may have been using this trip as a distraction from grief. My grandfather had passed away just a day earlier, and feelings of loss and pain affect me in strange ways. I guess it made me all the more eager to spread positivity and love in new places. A way to spread life. First we reached Torquay, where we stopped to buy some groceries and liquor to get us through the nights to come. We found a local market by the beach, where I bought some books and some CDs. While Maddie and Camille were browsing the many stalls, I wandered the perimeter of the market, finding poles and posts to stick my poetry onto. I began tracking my posting locations using an app called Pindrop so I could see where I'd already stuck up a cluster of poems. Then we headed away from Torquay and into Forest, which is a small township in the Otway Ranges. It's actually called Forest. Whenever I feel anxious or burnt out, I tend to get away from the city and seek the comfort of greenery and trees. The views along these ranges were really soothing for me. How could I let my grief overcome me in such beautiful places? We reached our cabin in Forest, where we would be staying for 2 nights.
Oh my god, it's so fucking cute!
Here we were met by our friends Tarkin and Ned. Tarkin had left his phone at a service station and went on his own strenuous journey to recover it.
What are you gonna do?
Go back and get it.
How far away is it?
It's about 40 minutes.
Man. Do you want to put your stuff inside before you go?
Fortunately, he was successful. We settled into the cabin and fell into immediate relaxation mode. I could have forgotten about the entire poetry tour in that cabin. We ate pasta and played Mario Kart, and at midnight we stood outside staring at the stars. We don't get night skies like this in Melbourne, so whenever I'm in the countryside, I like to appreciate the bright stars without all that light pollution. On the second day of the trip, we ventured deep into the forests of the Otway Ranges. Apparently the road trailed into something of a ravine where there was a beautiful waterfall at the bottom. We had to check it out. It was Camille's birthday. The The forest drive was incredible. I felt like I was entering some ancient mystical realm in the woods. It was like something out of Middle-earth. I almost expected to see white-clad elves emerging from the trees. None of it looked real, and yet it was realer than the urban crawl of the city with its skyscrapers and bitumen roads. After a long and winding journey, deeper and lower into the woods, we came to a parking lot surrounded by huge trees.
Hey Jaden,
Yeah,
tell me about what you're doing. What poetry are you putting up?
putting up some poetry. It's not even straight poetry anymore, it's forest poetry.
Forest poetry, let's go.
Forest poetry. It's really beautiful here. It's really nice. It's kind of crazy.
Pretty. Sick. So second stop along the Great Ocean Road?
Yeah. Yeah, first was Torquay. Now we're in some beautiful forest thing with a waterfall somewhere. We'll find it.
Yeah.
Find it somewhere.
Waterfall poetry is next.
Waterfall poetry! That's where it's at. Street poetry's out in 2024. Waterfall poetry is in.
I knew this would be a popular passing point for tourists coming here. So I left a few poems in the parking lot. I made sure to use only a little tape at the edges so that my poems were easy to remove if unwanted. We followed the walking trails deep into the scenic valley, dense with forest. There were all kinds of flora and fauna there. Birds, trees, fungi. We went by rocky streams under the shade of the tallest Californian redwood trees I'd ever seen. I left poetry in sneaky locations along the trail, hoping keen-eyed travelers would stumble across them on their adventures. We trailed along the rushing blue river where we could see the waterfall ahead. We reached the waterfall and its mists must have had some magic spell on them because we went from young, adventuring adults to children with far too much energy.
Poetry into trees.
In the trees.
Finally, we returned to the cabin before it got too dark for us to find our way back out. We were exhausted after our long adventure in the Forest Valley, but somehow we still had energy enough to watch the entire extended edition of The Lord of the Rings: Return of the King before we went to bed. The checkout time was 10 a.m. We headed into Lorne for coffee and breakfast. I'd been excited about this part of the trip, the part where I get to focus on my poetry. We found somewhere to eat and ease into the late morning, and it wasn't long before I seized the opportunity to carry on with the Great Ocean Road Poetry Tour. Ned and Tarkin had to head back to Melbourne, leaving Camille, Maddie and I for the rest of the road trip. I wandered around the town and the beachside on my own for several hours, finding anywhere I could to leave my poetry. I think I put up 300 poems in this one town alone. People in Lorne were some of the most responsive to my poetry. I received dozens of DMs from people who had stumbled across my words. People have been nothing but kind about my hopeful messages the entire time I've been working on this poetry project. I'm grateful technology has allowed total strangers to connect with me when they find my poetry in the spaces that they pass through. And here's Camille reading Catching Fire to Maddie while they wait for me to finish up posting my poems. It was time for us to leave Lorne and head to our next destination along the Great Ocean Road. This part of the trip was one of my favourites. The seaside views were otherworldly. I could see the jagged edges of the coast, the waves crashing on the rocks down below. The weather was phenomenal and consistently pleasant, unlike in Melbourne. Although getting stuck behind cyclists, while frustrating at the best of times, is more so along the Great Ocean Road, where overtaking isn't always an option with such sharp turns and bends in the cliffs. We stopped several times at numerous lookouts along the road where I, of course, left some poetry for the tourists and wanderers who would come after me in search of scenic views. Finally, we reached Apollo Bay, which had the bluest waters I'd ever laid eyes upon. We didn't linger in town for too long, except to walk along the beach in the early evening, and so I put my poetry project to rest for a night. We stayed on a camping ground a short distance from the main town. The tent was a little tricky to set up, but we worked it out in the end. Somehow, this was the first time I'd ever camped in a tent. It's safe to say I loved it. It wasn't entirely practical, but it served us well enough, and I loved the challenge of it. We read our books in the sinking sun by the Barham River and endured the mating calls of koalas in the trees. I had never realized that what I thought sounded like wild boars in the dark was actually just a nearby koala in a gum tree branch. One koala even followed me in the night while I was heading to the campground bathroom to charge my phone. I now understand why they get called drop bears. Those things are low-key terrifying. The three of us sat by the Great Ocean Road Bridge in the dark, watching the cars pass along the coastal road. That night, I sat up in the tent, opened my laptop, and began scribing the beginning of my Great Ocean Road journey from the beginning, while the details were still fresh to me. I ventured into the main town of Apollo Bay in the morning on my own. I started sticking poetry up at one end of the main strip and continued all the way through to the other side. Hundreds of poems for people to find. My bag of poetry was beginning to feel lighter, and I would probably run out of tape in the next couple of days. Then I headed to the beachside and resumed sticking up poetry along the trails and the piers. And it seemed that no one even paid any attention to me. They tend to only notice my poetry once I'm gone. Alright, I don't know if you can hear me because it's very windy, but we are at Apollo Bay. And this is one of the last stops on my tour. This is as far as we're going along the Great Ocean Road. And so far I've probably put up about 750 poems, somewhere around that, along all the towns of the Great Ocean Road. It's really scenic here, it's really beautiful. The air smells like salt, there are beaches and sand. I feel calm. I hope everyone else around me feels calm. I'm sure they do. And I hope when they find my poetry, they feel even more calm. And they can take something away from it when they return home. Because most people here are tourists. But I hope I can also inspire some hope among locals as well. It's been a really fun journey so far. We're not done yet. I still have 1 or 2 towns to visit on my return home. And it's been lovely. There's salt in the air and I can breathe easily. Maddie and I headed to Mariner's Lookout to get a good view of the whole of Apollo Bay. It was breathtaking. We were so high up I could barely see the people dotted along the beach or the cars on the road. Then Maddie and I went to the beach where I went for a swim and felt the salt on my skin, and it was really refreshing and rejuvenating, although I did get sunburn. The rest of the night was pretty chill. I was beginning to feel very miserable about the fact that this was our last night at the campsite, and that meant our last night on the road. We would have to make the journey home the following afternoon. A return to the urban crawl, a return to my grief, a funeral to attend. We left early, drinking coffee in town before beginning the return journey along the Great Ocean Road. The views returning weren't quite as nice as those on the way because we weren't in the lane that serpentines along the edges of the cliffs. It was coming to an end. The chaos, the natural beauty, the fresh air, the stars at night, and the sand in the day, all of it was crashing behind us, and all I saw ahead was the grim mundanity of city life. But I guess they say all things must come to an end at some point for a reason. Maybe good things lose their charm, but 5 days is not enough to immerse myself in freedom. Next time I will have to disappear from my life for a month, or maybe longer. But I wonder whether I'm chasing something unnecessary, or running away from something I'm afraid to confront. At least we still had some stops on the way back to look forward to. We took a pause in Lorne again for a food stop where I saw many of my poems still holding strong in the main town. Then we made for the final destination of the tour, Anglesey. I came here once with my family, and now I'm only passing through like a stranger with somewhere better to be. That's no way to treat a town, but time and money were against me. It's always money and time, isn't it? Always the damn things in our way. Or maybe it's just us. Maybe we are our own roadblocks. We didn't plan to stay in Anglesey for too long, just a couple of hours to delay the end of our road trip. We wandered some of the main strips in town, and I put up 100 poems in the area to end the poetry tour. I'd nearly gone through my entire bag full of poems, which meant my mission was more or less successful. I'd explored parts of Victoria that were new to me and had left a trail of poems behind me for tourists and wanderers to stumble across. I'd set out to achieve an ambitious project, 1,000 poems in less than 5 days along the Great Ocean Road. I think it's safe to say the mission was a success. At this point, I think the three of us were exhausted from the journey, the constant adrenaline and the awe-inspired wonder. We left after a little while and made the journey back to Melbourne, where it immediately began raining. Typical. Probably the universe reminding us that the fun was over and it was time to return to ordinary life.
So the Great Ocean Road Poetry Tour is done. We're in Anglesea at the moment, which is the last leg of the tour. I put up dozens of poems in the area, along the river and the beach side, in the main town. And yeah, we're all done. We're all finished now, so... it's been a good journey. It's been a lovely 5 days away from Melbourne. And I hope my poems inspire some hope amongst the communities along the Great Ocean Road, and I hope that I make more Victorians smile. So it's time for us to head back home. I have work tomorrow, so it is just back to normal life. But thank you for joining me on this journey. It's been really rewarding and breathtaking. Honestly, the views have been incredible along this road. So yeah, back to normal life. See you in the next one.